There was a study done recently by Lifeway Research which showed that 2/3 of Americans believe Jesus physically rose from the dead. That's 66% of the population who believe that the biblical accounts of the resurrection are completely true. Another 14% say they are unsure, and only 20% don't believe in the resurrection. Now, before we get too excited, we also need to consider that only 30% of American adults attend church regularly. So as author Rebecca McLaughlin commented, the idea that someone would say they believe Jesus actually rose from the dead, but that this belief would have so little impact on their life that they weren't even part of a church, is truly tragic. This exposes the danger of cultural Christianity, the vague assent to Christian beliefs without any evidence of actual faith in Christ. It's also quite likely that this lack of evidence, where the way that people live and act does not reflect what they say they believe, is a contributing factor to why so many of the younger generation do not believe today. According to the Springtide Research Institute, 1 million young people are leaving the church every year, because it seems they don't think the church cares about the issues that they care about, including justice issues, environmental issues, social issues, and so on, which is also tragic. Because I would argue that, biblically speaking, if Christians in America today were truly living like Jesus had been resurrected from the dead, then those are some of the issues they would likely be engaging in. How so? Well, as we saw in the last message, when Christ rose from the dead, his resurrection was the first fruits of the new creation that has now begun. Everyone who believes in him is part of that new creation. It means his resurrection guarantees that all who belong to him will one day be raised with him to live in a new heavens and new earth. So as theologian N.T. Wright wrote, "Our ultimate future is that we will be raised to new life in God's new world, not only to inhabit God's new creation, a world full of beauty and life and justice and freedom, but actually to run it on God's behalf. That's a solid New Testament truth, which the church usually keeps quiet about." I don't know about keeping quiet about it. I don't think many Christians even know about it. Because if we truly believe this, we would start living like it now, right? We would live as Easter people. I think it was Augustine who first coined that phrase, Easter people, meaning that we should live like Easter makes a difference in our lives, right? How we live should be a sign and a foretaste. A sign that Easter has happened, the new creation has begun, but also a foretaste of the future world to come. As N.T. Wright goes on to say, to be Easter people, we are called to anticipate here and now that future vocation. So in this message, I want us to consider what it means to live as Easter people, right? What does it look like to live as a sign and a foretaste? And there's a couple of things I want to highlight here. Behaving and building. Christ's resurrections should affect how we behave, but also what we build. All right, so first of all, how we behave. If we truly belong to Christ and we've been spiritually raised with him to be part of the new creation, it should become increasingly evident in our attitudes and behavior. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says in Colossians 1. "Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory." He's saying that we need to have a new mindset that goes with the new reality we are now living in. As Easter people, we are part of this new creation now. Our old self died with Christ on Good Friday. Our baptism was our funeral service. And just as Christ was raised from the dead, so too have we been raised spiritually. And when he returns, we'll be physically raised too. And that is the new reality for everyone who belongs to Jesus. So therefore, we have to live accordingly, right? We have to reset our minds on things above, on this new heavenly reality, and not on the things of this earth. Now, that doesn't mean we become so heavenly minded that we're no longer any earthly good, as we'll see in a minute. It just means we no longer live according to the pattern of this fallen world. As Paul goes on to say, "Put to death, therefore, what belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. Rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips." Right, these ways of behaving and talking, they don't belong to the new creation. They're going to pass away along with all that is corrupt in our present world. So we need to live according to this new reality, because we are Easter people now. It's like when I go to London. You know, when I land, it's 2 a.m. in America, but my phone will say 7 a.m. Right? It will reset itself to a different time zone, and I have to now live according to that new reality. My body says you should be in bed, but I have to reset my mind because it's daytime. I don't have to pretend it's 7 a.m. It is 7 a.m. and I now have to line up with that reality. Are you with me? So as Paul goes on to say in Colossians 3, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." Right? These are the clothes that Easter people wear. "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." Love is the chief characteristic of Easter people. Easter people don't judge others. They're not hateful, spiteful, or resentful. They don't retaliate, speak unkindly, or put people down. That is how the world behaves. It's the atmosphere of our culture, and it's so easy to inhale it and find ourselves breathing it out. But that's not who we are anymore. We are new creations now, which means breathing in the atmosphere of heaven, which is love, divine love. We receive God's love, we breathe it in, and then we breathe it out in our actions and words. Because you see, love is active. It's not passive. It's not enough to just tolerate people or put up with them. That's not love. Neither is it just about feelings and emotions. You know, we may not always feel love, but that shouldn't stop us from acting in love. Love is active. It reaches out. It makes sacrifices. God so loved the world, he gave his only son. He so loved you that he reached out to you and died for you. God didn't just tolerate you, he loved you, just like he loved me. And he didn't just love me for who I am, he loved me in spite of who I am. And not only does his love forgive my sins and failings, right, it's transforming me. I'm not the man I used to be, even 10 years ago, because his spirit in me is changing me, helping me to love with his love. That's why Jesus said, "As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another." The sign that we belong to Jesus, that we are Easter people, is seen in how we love one another. Jesus didn't say, "Everyone will know you're my disciples if you tolerate one another or put up with each other," but if you love one another. Radically, sacrificially, actively love one another. Put yourselves out for one another, as I did for you, says Jesus. Of course, none of us can love perfectly the way that he loves us. But as Easter people, we are learning. We're practicing. We are beginning to live in this new reality as a sign that the new creation has begun and as a foretaste of what it will be like in the renewed world. And as we breathe in and breathe out the atmosphere of heaven, it brings transformation. When we love people the way Jesus loved us, regardless of their race, gender, religious beliefs or sexual orientation, when we love them in spite of their character or behaviour, people who may seem unlovable, unlikable, unforgivable, then love will start to bring transformation. I believe we are beginning to see that at Gosling Meadows, the public housing neighbourhood next to our Portsmouth building. I know from personal experience that the atmosphere there can be so negative and hateful at times. But we've been serving the residents there for a number of years now, and I really believe our presence is making a difference, certainly in the lives of those that we serve each week. Some now come to our church. There are teens who are now part of our youth group. Some are asking about baptism. Easter people can change the atmosphere, because as they serve people in love, they are bringing heaven to earth. And I suspect if more Christians lived like that, then many more young people would be drawn to Jesus. So let me ask you, do people know that you're a true disciple of Jesus because of the way you love others? Or if Jesus asked you today, do you love others as I have loved you? What would you say? The second thing it means to be an Easter people is it not only affects our behaviour, it also affects what we build. That's what we see in 1 Corinthians 15, the scripture we looked at last time. In that chapter, the Apostle Paul talks at length about Christ's resurrection and how it guarantees our own, and that there is some continuity between our present decaying bodies and the new resurrection bodies that we will one day receive. We, along with all creation, will be renewed and transformed. So how would you expect Paul to conclude that chapter? That since we have this great hope, we don't need to fear death. We just all need to sit tight, get through life as best we can, because after death, or when Christ returns, a great future awaits us. Is that what our present life is all about? Just a waiting room until the new world comes into being? What's Paul's conclusion? He says this: "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain." So he's saying, if you believe in the future resurrection, then you'll be motivated to work hard in the present day. Why is that? Because none of our work in the Lord will be in vain. Just as there will be some continuity between our present bodies and our future bodies, so there will somehow be continuity between what we do with our lives now and what we'll enjoy then. It's like the things that we work at are seeds that are sown. Our labour will bear fruit, which will be fully realised and enhanced in God's new world. Now, I know some have tried to kind of define that work very narrowly, because when Paul refers to the work of the Lord, they conclude it must mean church ministry, like evangelism, missions, pastoral work and so on. But then Paul says it's your labour in the Lord that's not in vain. And so many theologians would say it is whatever we do as we live for God's glory. To quote Andrew Wilson in his commentary on 1 Corinthians, he says, "Work, not just Christian ministry, but ordinary everyday labour in an office or on a construction site or in the home, is made meaningful by the fact that we and everyone we work with and for will outlive this world." We are Easter people. Right? We've been raised with Christ. Our lives are hidden in Him. His Spirit lives in us. And therefore the people we serve, the work we are employed in, the God-given gifts and talents that we use, the things that we make or create, right? The good deeds that we do, the money we give, the prayers we offer, the kindness that we show, none of it is in vain. Because what we do in the present will somehow last into God's future. Again, listen to N.T. Wright in his book Surprised by Hope, which I thoroughly recommend. What do you do in the present by painting, preaching, singing, sewing, praying, teaching, building hospitals, digging wells, campaigning for justice, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbour as yourself? It will all last into God's future. They are part of what we might call building for God's kingdom. You know, we can't build God's kingdom because only God can establish his rule and reign on earth. But as Easter people, we are building for his kingdom, which means that amazingly, the things that we do now in the present will somehow become part of God's new world, only transformed and enhanced. And we can't even imagine how that will be. I mean, how could we possibly know what it will be like when the New Jerusalem, the holy city, comes down out of heaven and earth are reunited? But that is what we are building for. N.T. Wright says it's like being a stonemason working on part of a great cathedral. Right, there's a whole team of stonemasons who have been given different tasks, shaping different stones. They haven't seen the architect's plans. They don't know how their work relates to other people's work, or even where in the building their work belongs. They may not even be aware of what others are doing in creating art or furnishings for the building, or those who are helping to administrate, or who are providing finances and resources, or preparing food for the workers, taking care of their needs. Everyone has their own task. They may not live to see the cathedral completed, but they trust the architect that their labour is not in vain. Nothing they've done will be wasted. They themselves are not building the cathedral, they are building for the cathedral. Can you see? That's what we're doing, building for the kingdom. And one day when God's kingdom is fully realised, we will rule and reign with Christ over the new world. And because there will be peace, harmony, beauty, justice and love, we work for those things now. We are to be both a sign and a foretaste of that new world. It's why Easter people are hopeful people. Now, I realise that some may take a much more pessimistic view of things. You know, they say this world is broken, evil is too entrenched, we cannot make things better, we just have to get by until Christ returns and puts things right. Or they might say this present world is going to be burned up one day, so why care about anything? Let me just address those views as I bring this to a close. I'll start with the view that the world and everything in it will one day be burned up. That thinking, which is common among many fundamentalists, is based on 2 Peter 3:10, where Peter says in his letter, "The day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire." Now, some have interpreted that as meaning the earth will be destroyed. So, why bother caring for the environment if it's all going to be burned up one day? Or you might say, why bother creating art or making anything? I mean, if it's all going to go up in flames. Surely the only thing we should be spending our time doing is getting souls saved so they'll escape this Armageddon. But most credible scholars will tell you that what Peter is talking about there is not annihilation, but purification. God is coming to judge sin and evil and to purify the earth and the heavens from its corrupting effects. He's coming to liberate the earth, which the Apostle Paul makes clear in Romans 8. And so as Peter goes on to say in his letter, "But according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells." God's original creation will not be destroyed, but renewed and redeemed. Right? So there'll be continuity between the original creation and the new creation. Which is why Martin Luther, when asked what would he do if the world were to end tomorrow, was reputed to have said, "I would plant an apple tree today." So the things we do now, the work that we engage in, really does matter because it will last into God's future. And that should radically change how we see our lives and the world that we live in. As Tom Nelson wrote in his book, Work Matters, if we believe that the earth, everything about it and everything we do on it is simply going to one day be abolished and disappear, then the logical conclusion is that our work is virtually meaningless. But if our daily work done for the glory of God and the common good of others in some way carries over to the new heavens and new earth, then our present work itself is overflowing with immeasurable value and eternal significance. It also means that God's original mandate to look after the garden and to cultivate the earth is renewed with fresh meaning. It means taking care of our environment and all the creatures that God has created is all part of our mission, because we know that one day this world and everything in it will be liberated and radically healed. But what about those who get discouraged by the evil and chaos in the world? Who think that because we can't seem to solve the pervasive social issues and injustices, then why bother? Let's just pray for Jesus to come now and put things right. But what they don't understand is that Jesus has already come, and with his resurrection and victory over death, he's already started to put things right. God's new world has already broken into the present. It was launched when Jesus rose from the dead, and all who have been raised with him are part of that new creation and have a role to play in building for his kingdom. It means working for the health and the flourishing of the planet and all who live on it, working to bring peace and reconciliation where there is conflict, labouring to bring freedom and justice for the abused, for the oppressed, the refugee, the unborn, fighting against poverty and racism, bringing order to the chaos, creating beauty in the brokenness. It's what we're praying for every time we say the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. We know we cannot build God's kingdom on earth by our own efforts. We know it won't be fully realized until that day when Jesus returns and everything is transformed. But we can build for his kingdom, knowing that our labor is not in vain. And if we, the church, will live like that, as Easter people, full of love and full of hope, then maybe the younger generations will come to realize the reason why they care so much about things like justice and equality, about environmental and social issues, is because that's what God cares about. In which case, we have good news to share with them, which is not believe in Jesus and you can go to heaven when you die. Rather, it is you are invited to be a part of this new creation. Surrender your life to Jesus. Surrender everything to him. Let it die with him so you might be raised with him to live a new life, to be an Easter people, a sign and a foretaste of the new world to come. Amen. Now here are some questions for small group discussion. What things particularly stood out to you in this message? Were you challenged to change your thinking about anything? Secondly, share some examples of where you see people actively loving others, and how else might we demonstrate such love? Thirdly, share how you see others in your group contributing to the flourishing of the planet or those who live on it. And fourthly, pray for God's help in being an Easter people. Pray for the younger generations.